Today I'm going to give you a quick rundown of how I sew buttonholes by hand using a silk buttonhole twist. Um, and really I'm kind of showing this to you as an idea for thicker fabrics that you might have trouble putting through a machine, but it does work really well on any fabric. So it's not limited to thicker fabrics, it's just I think that's what people get the most nervous about and what their sewing machines struggle with the most. So I'm mainly sort of targeting this at coat fabrics. So this is the example that I will be demonstrating today, and this is on a really thick double layer of melton wool. I haven't got any interfacing in it or anything, so it's not as precise as a direct coat construction, but it sort of gives you an idea of what you can do with fabrics you might struggle with in your sewing machine. So I hope this is helpful to you, and let's get started. So I've got all my equipment that I'm going to need laid out here, and this is what I'll be using to create my hand sewn buttonhole. So I've got a scrap of some main fabric. So this is coating fabric and it's a melton wool. This is the button we'll be basting the hole on, a ruler to measure out the buttonhole, and some chalk for marking the buttonhole, some very sharp scissors to cut it open, got some sharp sewing needles here, and 3 different types of thread, all coordinating with the main fabric. So I've got a standard sewing thread, a thicker sewing thread, and a silk buttonhole twist. And then finally we've got some beeswax for coating the silk twist. So let's get started. Let's begin by marking our buttonhole. So I've got my main fabric here, the ruler and some chalk. So the way I work out how big to make my hole is I measure my button, and that comes to 2.2 centimeters, and then I add on half a centimeter, so that takes me to 2.7 centimeters. That kind of works for most buttons if they're sort of this standard flat shape. If it had more thickness to it, then you might want to add a bit more. So in preparation, I have just cut a slit on this piece of fabric here, the length that I have estimated it to be, and I can just make sure that the button fits through. So we're not risking cutting into our fabric before we actually know that this is going to work for our chosen buttons. Let's pretend our center front of our coat is here. So I'm imagining this scrap of fabric is the front of a coat, and this is where it bends round to form the facing. Okay, so I've got a double width layer of melton wool. There's no interfacing in here, but you might have interfacing if you were sewing a coat. And then squaring with the front, or square with the front of with this edge of the scrap, I shall make a line, whoops, where the buttonhole will be, and it's 2.7, which is here. So then I'll just make that mark nice and clear. Okay, so that's where our buttonhole will be. Now, this is the bit where we shall cut through the fabric. So you can see I've just basted the 2 layers together. That's not a bad idea to do, actually, even if you've got the fully formed garment, just to keep everything together so nothing shifts whilst you're making your buttonhole. So it just has to be roughly around the area. Wait a minute, I just went to grab this tool. Actually, this is a sewing awl, and it's got a really nice sharp end, and actually it's going to help me out just to make a hole in to get my scissors in. So if I can just poke that in there, and in the other end of the buttonhole, and then the scary bit. The first bit is the scary bit, and that's where we cut the buttonhole open. Now these scissors are so good, they're really sharp, they're applique scissors. So I think you can probably find these in various different places, but if you just Google applique scissors, they're amazing. Right, so we've done that bit, cut the hole open. So we've got our 2 layers there, and then I'm going to whip stitch those together. Right, threaded my needle, and then I've also cut a short length of the thicker coordinating thread that I had in the beginning when I was explaining what materials we'll be using. Now I'm using this in place of, you can get this thread called buttonhole gimp, and what it does is it creates a thick ridge to sew your buttonhole over, so it kind of stands out away from the fabric, but it can be quite hard to get hold of. Also, you have to have a matching colour, and it just adds to all the materials that you need. It's not essential to sew a buttonhole, but it does make it look nicer in the end. And I just happen to have some red thicker thread, but what you could do is you could use your silk buttonhole twist, and you could maybe double, triple or quadruple some of that up just to create a thicker strand, and you could use that in place of this or in place of gimp. What I need to do is, starting from the outer edge of the buttonhole, so where the button isn't going to sit, which is this edge, I'll just get my thread in place, and this is for the whip stitching. So I'll lose the tail in the fabric and then just do a little anchor stitch like that, and then I shall whip stitch the edges of the buttonhole, but also I shall stitch over this thicker thread. I didn't actually manage to do that. So I'll stitch over this thicker thread all the way around the buttonhole, and then I'll have 2 tail ends sticking out this end. Okay, so I'll just get that done for you. I've whip stitched all the way around the hole, and you can see hopefully that the thicker thread is trapped in between those whip stitches. So if I pull these ends, they will pull that buttonhole, the ends of the thicker fabric. So I'll take my standard thread, which is the one that's on the needle that I did the whip stitches with, and I will quickly just anchor that off, and I'll thread that back through the fabric, not coming out the other side, and I will trim off my thread tail. Right, so we can leave these thicker ends where they are for now, and let's prepare the silk thread. I've cut my length of silk thread, and with this you want to cut off a length that's gonna hopefully sew the whole buttonhole in one. Now I'm thinking what I've cut isn't long enough, so I'll probably have to join in a piece, which isn't ideal, but it's also not the end of the world. So the first thing we need to do is prepare it with this beeswax. So we'll just pull the thread through it, and it will stop the thread from kinking like this when we're sewing, and also it helps to strengthen it for the finished buttonhole. So I just hold it in the middle with my thumb, and I pull the thread through, and I'll pull it through one more time like that on that half of the thread, and then I will come through again and swap sides. So now I'm pulling through the other end of the thread. Okay, and then that's coated in the wax. And then I'll put my wax to one side and I'll just quickly switch the iron on. Right, using any kind of scrap of paper really. It doesn't have to be anything special. I folded my paper in half and just need to pull my thread out a little bit. Right, so that's encased in there. And then I put my iron on top of the paper, grab my little tail, and then I pull it through so that the whole thread has a chance to pass underneath the heat of the iron. Right, I have got the steam on that iron and there was no need for that, so don't worry about that. And then as you can see, now it's passed through the heat, it's turned into a much stiffer, different texture of fabric. Let me just switch the iron off. Right, so we'll move our paper out the way and find my needle. Now you just want as sharp a needle as you have got, and you kind of want one with quite a small eye, but you want to be able to thread it as well, so just whatever you feel you can manage really. The shorter the needle, so the less length you've got here, the better for you, because it means your thread will go longer towards the end. When you've got not very much thread to work with. This actually looks a bit long to me, but I'm going to use it anyway. But as you run out of thread, it's helpful if you've got a shorter needle, because you can still carry on doing your stitches. Right, so this end of the buttonhole, where the furthest away from where the button will sit, is where we're going to start. So we want to, just as we have done before, lose our tail inside the fabric like that, and then do just a little anchor stitch. Okay, let's get those threads out of the way because we don't need that. And then going in through the buttonhole, and try and come out as much at a right angle as you can. You wrap the thread that comes out of the eye of the needle, okay? So let me just show you that again. So it's this part of the thread that's coming out the eye of the needle, and you wrap that around the needle. And then you pull that, and what it does is it creates a little knot which will form the edge of your buttonhole. Okay, so I'll just show you that again. So you try and come out as much of a 90-degree angle as you can. Then you wrap the thread around the needle. And then you pull the knot close. Right, I did that a bit fast, so let's slow down. So inside the buttonhole, come out at as close to a 90-degree angle. Take the thread from the eye end of the needle, wrap it round the front of the needle, and then pull to make your knot, okay? So then you'll just carry on doing nice close together stitches up, around and down. So I'll just get on and do that. I've reached almost the end of my buttonhole and my thread is getting quite short now, so I'm finding it hard to wrap the end of my thread around the needle. So what I can do instead is, and this thread is getting quite twisty now, is go through the fabric like you would, make a loop and go underneath and through the loop, okay? So, and then pull the knot down. So it's just a different way of forming the buttonhole stitch. So I'll do that one more time for you. So I'm making my stitch as normal, and then rather than wrapping around the needle, I'm pulling the thread through, making sure not to twist this loop, and then going underneath the loop that goes, the underside of the loop basically, and then pulling the knot down. Okay, and I've kind of pretty much reached the end anyway. So now what you do here, so I'm going through the underside of the loop. Let's get this little bit out of the way, this little thread tail here. Oh wow, there's a load of stuff going on here, isn't there? We have definitely reached the end. Okay, and then pull your knot down. Right, so this last bit then, how you finish your buttonhole is kind of up to you really. So you could just do a bar tack in the end and that would be sufficient. And that's pretty much what I do, but I will try and show you if I've got enough thread to do a bar tack with some buttonhole stitches along it. Right, at this point you can give these threads just a little bit of a tug just to tighten everything in a bit. Let's pop that down there, see what it looks like. And then what I shall do is you can either thread them through into your fabric and out somewhere, or I'm just going to snip them off actually. But if you would like the added security of threading them through, then you can do that. But they're not structural as such. Right, so I'll just do a couple of these bars at the end of the buttonhole, and then with what I've got left I shall try and make some buttonhole stitches along those bars. So I will sew it this way of going through the loop, which I think should work fine. Let's have a look. Just like to form a full stop, I suppose, at the end of the buttonhole. And just something a bit fancier than just doing those long stitches. Okay, and then you can just thread your thread through, do a little anchor stitch, and there we have it. There's your buttonhole. Right, so let me, now what it could help, or what it could do with at this stage, is just a little light steam from the iron. So just switch that on quickly. So I'm just hovering over the fabric, but I'm not actually touching it. Let's have a look. And there's our buttonhole, looking pretty nice actually. What do you think? Yeah, I'm happy with that actually. Oh, what we should do is test with the buttonhole. Let's have a look. Oh, it's quite snug, but I think that's good. Yeah. Okay. Oops, I forgot to show you the back. So this is what it looks like on the back. So just some little stitches, never going to be as neat as the front, but you know, it's not bad. So I've done really quite small buttonhole stitches. Let me get my needle because it's even hard, or my unpicker. It's hard to even explain. So the edge of my buttonhole would be here, and I've literally come out of the fabric either 1 or 2 millimeters away from the cut edge, so it is all quite narrow, but I think that gives a really neat finish. And then you've just got those knots lining the edge of the buttonhole, and there's our little tack at the end. This wasn't the first one I sewed. I think with buttonholes, what you will find is it's always the second or third one that looks, it looks like you're getting something that you are aiming for. I find like with the first one, you have to do a practice on some scrap fabrics, because even if you get comfortable now and then you go away and you don't sew a buttonhole for a number of months, and when you come back, you're kind of going to have to go through this process again and get back used to it. So this was the first one that I tried on this fabric, and as you can see, it's got a totally different look. The stitches are a lot bigger. Is that the back? No, that is the front. The stitches are a lot bigger, and from doing this I thought, oh no, that is not what I'm aiming for. So that was my first try. This was the one that I'm showing you. So once you know what you're doing, it doesn't take long to figure out how you want to improve it. And obviously it's all subjective, and what you want your buttonhole to look like is completely different. And you might want to use proper buttonhole gimp to give it a really raised finish, or you might want to do a keyhole shape, so punch a hole in the end of your slit to give more of a military buttonhole feel, I guess. So it's really all just practice. But once you've got the materials, once you know what materials you need to use, so the silk thread, the beeswax, how you prepare your buttonhole with the whip stitches, from there it's just all about personal preference. And I'm showing you on a thick woolly fabric, and I think that this is much more forgiving of wonky stitches, because even this one, I would be happy for that to be on a coat, really. I mean, it's better than what I'd be able to sew on the sewing machine, I'm sure, on this thick fabric. So yeah, and here's a quickly show you a test piece that I did when I first was learning how to do them, and these are all keyhole ones. So it's just a slash in the fabric, and then I think I just use some scissors to snip out a bit at the end rather than using a punch to punch a hole in. And then by the time I got down to number 11, I'm not suggesting that you need to sew 11 buttonholes, but you can see each one from number 1, I'm kind of changing each time. So these ones, they look really chunky, the hole is really big, and as I've worked down the fabric, I've sort of got a more slimline look. To be honest, I think I like this one best, but it's all about experimenting. And with this keyhole one, these knots, you can actually just, once you finish sewing, you can be quite rough with them and sort of reposition them if you want to, make it look how you want, again with the steam of the iron. Yeah, it's just all about practice. I think someone in the sewing community was once challenging themselves to do buttonholes. I'm not sure if they actually did do this year challenge, but what they were saying was they were going to sew 100 buttonholes, because I think it takes about 100 buttonholes to perfect it, if but that's like aiming high. I think that's for like tailoress type standards, isn't it? I mean, we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves. We are home dressmakers, and I think actually we can do a pretty good job without sewing 100 buttonholes. So yeah, I would be more than happy with that on a coat, I think. So yeah, hopefully this tutorial was helpful, and I wish you all the luck, and I hope to see some popping up somewhere. Good luck!